Welcome to Rhythms That Restore. I'm your friend Charisse that's ready to journey beside you. Let's learn rhythms that can restore our minds, hearts, bodies, and spirits, and allow us to walk confidently in who God has called us to be. Are you ready? Pull up a chair. Let's get started. Hey everyone, Happy New Year to you. Welcome. It's January 9th, 2025. We are so excited to be here. My friend Allison Bradsher is here in the studio. For those of y'all watching on YouTube with me, we got our tea. We've had a little snack. Yeah. We talked for about 30 minutes. I said, we've got to hit record because there's been so much goodness already. But I'm so thrilled to have Allison here. You guys have heard her before on the podcast, mainly like broadcasting from the retreat house and doing some teaching on anchoring. But I asked Allison to come back today, which I am trying so hard to not have her in teaching mode. I'm like, Allison, I want you to share your story with all of us and with me. I wanted to know her story and her journey through how she became a spiritual director and really how she's grown in her faith and closeness to the Lord, because I know it's impacted my life. And so I asked her to be here for that. But then also Allison wrote this beautiful quote at the end of her notes. And so that's why I titled it Saying Yes to God's Invitation in 2025. And I thought that would be a beautiful way for us to start this year off is what would it look like? What can it look like when we say yes to God's invitation this year? Right. Yeah. And I think we've all been journeying through this is 45 episodes. We've been journeying through, Lord, how can we grow closer? How can we lean into what you have? And really, this whole podcast started because of my journey, learning a lot of these contemplative practices through the retreat house. And so anyways, Allison, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. Okay. So much that we want to learn and talk about today, especially after the holidays. I think it is a beautiful time we're all ready to slow down. It is really the dead of winter in January. It's cold, it's dark, and it's almost a beautiful way for us because it does naturally slow us down. And God's invitation, I think he can get our attention if we're looking a little bit better in January.
Yeah. And we're paying a little bit better attention in January because we are invited by the calendar year to look back and look forward and maybe pause and notice what has happened over the past year. What do I hope for going forward? So it's just a really nice time to stop and pay attention to this idea of being on a journey.
I remember last year, I don't know if it was you or it was Camille Brantley, maybe it was probably both of y'all, but one of you guys shared something about January, how everything can look like nothing's happening, especially if you're thinking of like plants and growth, that from the top, it looks dead. The trees look dead, everything does, but it's what's happening underneath the soil and the surface. And I think that we can look at ourselves like that, that during this time of winter, you know, God gave us seasons for a reason, to slow us down, to have us look inward. But it's this time that the roots, right, are being nourished and cultivated.
Yeah, I have heard said that even the leaves falling from the trees create this blanket. Like we like to rake them all up and get rid of them, but they can really create like a warmth for the earth to do that under the ground work. And I think the seasons of the earth are such a good reminder of the spiritual seasons and of the spiritual life, because we think that things are happening when we can see fruit, when there's something being produced, when there's something we can see. There's so much happening when it feels like nothing is being produced or nothing is happening, that can be a really rich time for the roots, which are hugely important for the growth. So I'm glad you mentioned that metaphor.
Isn't that beautiful? Like nothing God does is by accident. Nothing. And so why do we think that? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. I should probably tell everybody a little bit about you. I like dove into everything. Y'all, you can tell. I love being in Allison's space, and I love talking about good and deep things with Allison. But let me tell you guys a little bit about Allison professionally. So Allison is a wife to Rob, and you guys have been married for how many years?
17, 18, something like that.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Wife to Rob for 17 years, mom to 4 amazing kids. And tell us their ages.
Evelyn is 14. Wilder is 12 and I have 10-year-old twins. So
how did I not know that? Boy and girl?
Yeah.
Or maybe I did.
Yeah, I didn't say their names, Mabel and Deacon.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so I have 2 girls and 2 boys.
Allison, say their ages again so I can process
14,
that.
12, and 2 10-year-olds.
Wow. Y'all, you're about to have a whole house full of teenagers.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. My oldest is really easing me into all of that. She's just sweet and easy, and that has been nice for the teenage years, but I don't assume that that'll always be the case. So,
right. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're definitely very busy with the 4 of them and, running your house and then mentoring, and I want to call it discipling, but what is the word for spiritual directing?
Well, interestingly enough, it's really similar to motherhood because it's this like nurturing energy that you're creating a safe space for people to grow and become themselves and connect with God. And you're listening a lot. You're listening to who is this person that God has dreamed them up to be a certain someone, and how is God shaping them and inviting them. And that is similar to motherhood. I'm seeing these 4 very different souls and people who God has dreamed up. And how can I foster them becoming the most them and in connection with God?
Yeah.
And so spiritual direction and motherhood are really both true parts of me that come from the same thread.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so neat. In case I haven't said it, you guys, Allison is my spiritual director. That's what we're talking about. And to so many other people. So that's neat.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't even know. It's not like you call us like clients.
What is this that we're doing?
Yeah. But so Allison has been a spiritual director and is the co-founder of the retreat house in Memphis, which we talk about all the time on the podcast. And we so invite all of you guys, if you don't live in Memphis, you can come on in. If you are in Memphis, come out. Like we're going to talk about that, make that a rhythm for this year. You trained in spiritual direction and spiritual formation at Moody Bible Institute. Is that in Chicago?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
So I would go 4 times a year. It was a 2-year training program.
Really?
And I would go 4 times a year to do these like intensives, retreats, and I would learn, we'd get teaching, and then we'd get curriculum that we'd take home and work on and do papers and stuff like till the next retreat. And I did that for 2 years. So.
Wow. Was that did you went in person? That was pre-COVID?
I started in 2018. And so we did wrap up. Our final retreat was on Zoom. Wow. Because COVID did hit the very end of that program.
Wow. How interesting that you would do it those years before, and that, post-COVID, there's such a need for spiritual direction and for all these rhythms that you've been teaching us.
It is kind of coming into awareness for people that it exists. I mean, I didn't know that it existed for years, but happened to be reading a book over 10 years ago where the author was a spiritual director. And I began looking into contemplative practices in general and thought, I'd like to know more about this. Having somebody who helps you listen to your life, and they're listening with you and on your behalf. And they're asking you questions to help you pull on the threads of what's God up to in my journey. So I started meeting with this author. I reached out to her and started meeting with her. And then I started thinking, I think that this might be natural for me. Like in relationships, I tend to listen and I tend to be curious. And so I decided to get some training myself. And that's when I did the program.
Was that author here in Memphis?
No, I meet with her over the phone. So, and I still do. In spiritual direction, you can meet in person, Zoom, over the phone. And because it's a listening, I love the in person. You can feel, some things that you may not pick up on as much over the phone. But those are valuable ways to do it as well.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I did not know that part of your story. And you grew up here in Memphis and still love living here now.
I do. I love Memphis. Gritty, tough to live here, but I love it.
For everyone that doesn't live in Memphis, we all will kind of allude to it, yet we love, Memphis gets a bad rap, but, and I was saying this with Camille, but there is such a heart in our city.
Yeah.
The community, the people, the way God is moving and how he is using everyone here is unlike anywhere I have ever heard of.
Yes. So many people and ministries and organizations working for the good of this place. And there's a lot of challenges, but I think there's beauty that comes, and there's like a team spirit to it, a connectedness among those of us who are here.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. And Memphis, isn't it famous for being like one of the most philanthropic cities?
I would not be surprised if that's true.
Yeah.
There are so many nonprofits and people doing good work.
I know. See, y'all non-Memphians come to Memphis. Come to Memphis.
It's a good place to live.
But one of the things that you said I loved is that you said that you love living here and working to see the people of this city thrive.
Yes. And that's really the heart of the retreat house, is seeing Memphians thrive from the inside out. And there's a lot of wonderful ministries that are meeting people's outer needs, which are very necessary in how we care for people. But also sometimes there's a lot of inner pain and hurt that needs care in order for people to take hold of those outer helps. And so the inner life is something we all have. And so the retreat house, when people are like, who is it for? I'm like, it's for everyone, because we all have an inner life and we all have pain and story and a spirituality. And so, but that's really the hope and the heart, is that it will be a blessing to our city, because it's a blessing to the people who live here.
It is. It is. And the inner life is one of those things that can be often neglected because you can't see it.
Yes.
And it doesn't show fruit immediately because you're working through that.
Yes.
But
it's like under the ground. It's like the root.
It is. It's just like
part you can't see.
Yes. Yet it's exactly where everything comes from.
Yes.
Everything.
Yes.
And so I'm so grateful that you guys followed the promptings of your heart, that you knew there was a need. And man, I know you guys have jumped through some hurdles, and you continue to keep the doors open.
Yeah.
Man, but thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for championing it and supporting us and just participating and bringing others out. And it's cool to see God bring people and grow it.
Yeah, man, it's good. Okay. We haven't even gotten through Allison's bio, y'all. I love, Allison said she loves reading, journaling, yoga, and slow walks. Yeah. Allison's teaching me, y'all. Yes. You're teaching me how to slow down. The struggle is real. But let's talk about too. Okay. It's a brand new year and we are all learning some new rhythms. We're leaning into doing a little bit more inner work on ourselves, things that we can't see. And I love that you had said when you were sharing with me some of your daily rhythms, that you said that you love to focus on anything that seems to be asking for your attention, like on a daily rhythm where you just quiet your mind and you come to the Lord and say, well, actually, let me ask you that. How do you even know what is asking for your attention?
Well, one thing that comes to my mind as you ask it is how that rhythm, when I think about rhythms, I try to keep it kind of broad, like not rigid, not constricting. Like rhythms are meant to support our life. They're not meant to feel like shaming, like a to-do. And so this particular rhythm of paying attention to whatever is asking for my attention leaves a lot of room for that to be whatever God has for it to be that day.
Okay.
Without the rigidity of like, I have to do this thing for X amount of time. So this has helped me because I'm just trying to notice on a daily basis, where is God inviting me to pay attention a little more deeply. So that could be to a short passage of scripture. Sometimes I'll start my day with scripture, and there may be a particular word or phrase that I just feel really drawn to. And the way that I stay with that is I just meditate on it and I bring my attention back to it for a sustained amount of time. And then I kind of carry it around with me all day.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't have to be scripture. Like I could be on one of my slow walks and notice the roots of a tree and allow myself to give all my attention to those roots and wonder about just what we just talked about. What's happening under the surface? What is the purpose of roots? What's going on with my inner roots? And I let it start a conversation with me and God.
Okay.
And so that's another piece of the paying attention is like, what is this stirring up in me? And how can I interact with God about it? What does God want me to notice? What do I need from God? What do I need God to know? So I just let a particular thing unearth that. So a word, a phrase, something I notice out in creation on my walk, a quote that I read in a book, a feeling. It can be inside. Like I just have this like nagging irritation. That could be something that I choose to pay more attention to and bring into that meditative space of like, what is this about? I'm going to just notice it deeply for a sustained amount of time. God, what do you want me to notice? What do I need to say to you about this irritation? And it unfolds a prayer. It unfolds a conversation. I don't know if does that answer the?
So I'm thinking about that because I know for me, like if I have, and you've taught me this, but if I have like a tightness in my chest or like a tightness in my throat or something, my inkling or inclination would be to like, how can I fix it?
Yeah.
Do I need to do, what is it? Take some Advil or something. But what you've been sharing and teaching me is like, how can I like even put my hand on my chest and notice and then sit with it? And I don't think that that's been my bent for so long. It's how can I fix it? How can I move on? How can I push it down and keep going? And so that's such I want to like peel back, or it's just not a natural bent of mine,
right,
to slow down,
right, or of anyone's, because those sensations are uncomfortable.
Correct.
And so I'm glad you brought this up, because when it comes to what am I to give my attention to, sometimes what sort of I feel drawn to, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like something just feels like it's drawing me towards it. It can be something comfortable and delightful, like a beautiful passage of scripture, or a beautiful fall day, but it can also be something uncomfortable that's asking for our attention. And all of us want to get rid of those. Yes. We want to fix those. We want to delete them. We want them to go away. How do I get rid of this emotion, this body sensation that is uncomfortable? I have found incredible richness in paying attention to those things, because they have a message. They have something to say.
Right.
They're there for a reason. And if we can pay attention long enough with God in prayer to be curious about it. So curiosity over getting rid of or fixing it reveals like a whole lot, a whole lot of information. And it can be a much more honest starting place sometimes in a prayer, in a conversation with God.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, that's about a fear or something I've been trying to hold everything together. God, what do you want me to know? And then God has a chance to be like, you don't have to hold everything together. Like, take a deep breath. I'm holding it all together. And so what can enter into that space is so rich and beautiful, but it takes growing our capacity for the uncomfortableness of thoughts, feelings, sensations, experiences that we don't like. Yeah.
How do we even grow our capacity for those experiences? Through practicing, noticing?
I think that's one of the benefits, honestly, of spiritual direction is somebody else helps Whereas we would quickly, like when I meet with my spiritual director, sometimes I'll have some tears come up and I will naturally want to stop crying. That I get, and she'll invite, what do those tears want to say? Let those out. And I try to do that for people that I meet with as well. Hold a little more space for what this is that's coming up when we would naturally tend to move on from it. So spiritual direction can have that support to this idea of growing capacity for discomfort. And then we can do it on our own too.
Yeah.
And all that means is just don't leave it. Notice, put your hand there. Allow your attention, sometimes it's in my throat or my jaw or wherever it is. We can place a hand, we can close our eyes, we can just notice it prayerfully. Does that make sense?
Yes. That's been a huge shift that I'm working on. Yeah. I was even struggling with that a little bit today. Like I felt like I was noticing that my body was saying, you need to slow down and you need to rest. And I was sharing this with a friend, and my aura ring also told me, like, girl, you need to pump the brakes today.
The ring was also sending you a message.
It was. But I was sharing that with a friend, and I said, I'm internally struggling with this because my body is telling me I need rest today. But my mind and my checklist and my striving is telling me, but I need you to do this and I want you to do this. And so it's that okay, Lord, how can I honor what you've given me these signals for a reason? And I think my whole life I've always been like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how you feel, you're going to get it done.
Yes. You override that message.
Yes. And so what can it look like to lean into the listening? It's just so countercultural.
It is. Yeah. It is. But it has so much potential for showing us things about the things that we're carrying.
Yeah.
Because we start to ask the question, why can't I let myself rest? What is that?
Yeah.
What is that? Do I feel overly responsible? And is there anyone I'm trying to please? So we start to get curious. What is that part of me that just keeps on pushing through that need for rest?
Yeah.
And that can be something, that God wants to heal that place too.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful practice for us, all of us, like, okay, starting to notice and starting to listen to, what is God inviting me? What is the invitation that he has for me? Yes. I love that.
Yes.
Let's talk about this too. I know that you shared that silence is a really big practice for you, and also a rhythm that you have given to yourself and something that you schedule in time for silence. And we shared about this before we hit record too, that sometimes when I'll invite a friend into silence, there's two camps. There's one that's like, yes, I cannot wait. I need it. Yes. And then there are other camps that say, I can't even imagine. How can y'all do this? So how have you found that this is a beautiful practice for you as a mom of 4 and a wife and running a nonprofit? But even before that, why is this such a beneficial practice for you, but for all of us?
Yeah. I don't think silence was handed to me as a tool in the spiritual life until about 10 years ago. And up until that point, I had thought of spiritual practices as adding things. You add a Bible study to your life, or you're going to community group, or you're a part of, a church, or you're reading this book, you're adding something. And so I say this a lot at the retreat house, that we value practices of subtraction, like removing things in order to create space. And so I learned that this was a helpful thing to life with God about 10 years ago. And I just tried it. I was like, I'll experiment. I'll try. I feel pretty open as a person. Like I like to explore and experiment and try new things. And so that allowed me personally to enter into it with curiosity of just like, I'm willing to try it and see if I like it. Well, I did happen to like it. I think I'm in the camp of it's like water in the desert
Yes.
for me. And when we have full lives, when we have a lot of people who depend on us, kids, spouse, friends, work community, like I find that it feels really good to step away from all that and just remember that I'm just a person who needs God's love. And that when I'm in spaces where I get to not take care of anybody else, that feels very good to me. Feels very freeing. So part of silence holds that for me. Just a freedom of not taking care of anybody else, but the freedom to pay attention to what's going on in me.
Yeah.
But it's also the removal of words, saying words to one another. But a lot of times in silence, I will literally sit in silence without reading a book or listening to anything, and just leave that container open for God to fill it with whatever. And the hard part is we feel fear around what could come into that space. You've got some yard people.
Speaking of silence.
It's okay. It's okay. They're doing their work, their care for the yard.
Yep. Which is actually a very good segue into Allison. Because I'm thinking, I think many times women can hear that and go, I'll just do that at my house. I can just do that. And this is case in point. Why we can't? Because, there's people, plumbers working on things outside your door. So why you had shared with me that this is something that you actually will schedule and go away.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So that is a great point, that you really need to leave your context. Even to be in your house by yourself, the needs are everywhere. Yeah. The things that need to be done around the house, the emails, the dishes, whatever it is, I need to physically retreat from all that.
Yeah.
And so part of silence for me is also coupled with retreat. And so I will every 6 months go away for 3 to 5 days to be in silence. And it has been such a joy to just find beautiful places all over the country. I travel usually. There are some places close, far. I've been everywhere from the Chattanooga area to California to find beautiful places. And California was one of my favorites because I went in February.
Really?
And it was frigid here.
Yeah.
And it was like stepping into an alternate universe. And so for me, all of that creates this container that's outside of my norm.
Yeah.
Where I'm available to God. And that's really the heart of silence, is availability. And God, what do you want me to notice? And it reorients us to our life that we then go back into.
Yeah.
Both parts are beautiful parts of our spiritual journey. But I need that reorientation. God, help me to see this in a new way through your eyes, through your perspective. And then we go back into it. So a lot of that can come up in silence and retreat. And I can feel, I know I told you this, like I can feel when it's like, it's got to be around the 6 month mark because I need to leave.
Yes. Right. Like a refueling.
Yeah.
You can sense that with your soul.
Yes.
How do you even find places like that, Allison? Like I know people that don't live here, they would maybe want to come to the retreat house, but maybe people are like, no, I want to go away by myself. You just Google?
I do just Google.
Yeah.
I Google retreat house or retreat center near me. I look into like contemplative prayer retreats. Like I'll look into spiritual directed prayer or silent retreats. So some places will have a retreat that you can receive spiritual direction each day of the retreat.
Oh, yeah.
And that's helpful because you're in silence for the whole day, except for this 1 hour where you meet with somebody who's going to help you process what's been coming up during all that time.
Yeah.
So
I remember a retreat that you guys did 2 years ago. And that was my first experience with spiritual direction.
Yeah.
And it was I don't know. There was a 24-hour one that we did. And then all of us said, no, we need more than 24 hours. And so y'all did a second one and you gave us 2 days in silence. And it was phenomenal. which is funny because we didn't even know. And I went with many of my girlfriends that all we do is talk. And so our husbands thought we were ridiculous. They were like,
like, are you really going to
you're
be
going away together to be silent? And they all made fun of us, and we loved it so much.
Yeah.
But that was my first experience with spiritual direction. I didn't even understand what it was, but it was such a beautiful thing to help me see what was coming up.
Yes.
And I think I had thought it was going to be just like counseling.
Yeah.
And my counselor, that's very different. And so I love the holding of space.
Yes.
I do love that. But I love this rhythm. And I had never heard that until you had shared that. But I did have one girlfriend that would go away and she'd stay at a hotel by herself. And it was that sounded amazing. She's like, I get room service. I stay in my pajamas the whole time. And I think there's a time and a place for that, but that was mainly a planning retreat where she was planning out the whole year. I think that's very different than what we're inviting women and men to do in this, because this is really getting away in silence, away from being connected, away from their phones, away from their calendars, and really just sitting and getting to be with the Lord. Like we are, when we say silence, and when we say getting alone, you're really not alone and you're really not silent because you're really in communion with the Lord. Lord, what do you have for me? And you're inviting him when you're alone. Like, Lord, we're together in this. You're not alone eating dinner. You're sitting there talking to the Lord. And I know that seems very weird, but there's so much conversation for me when I'm at a silent retreat. There's so much conversation going on.
The activity internally is a good bit. But to speak to the phone, I literally do, when I go on these retreats, I do turn off my phone for 3 to 5 days, give my husband the number of the place, like really don't let anything interrupt it. Which is a little scary. I mean, it brings up all kinds of emotions. Again, growing our capacity for uncomfortable feelings. That we really do have to be with that discomfort of being disconnected from all the people in our life. Because like you said, there are people who are in the camp of, I would love that. That would be so great. And people who are like, I could never do that. I would. And we do need to acknowledge that both are part of the experience.
Correct.
That there are delightful, beautiful things about it. And there's ways that we feel like, oh, good, nobody needs me. And then there's ways of feeling disconnection that feel really scary. And can feel difficult. And we grow our capacity for both.
I was just thinking that, like, that's when we allow ourselves to be in an uncomfortable or new situation, that's where that capacity grows. But when we stay in that comfort zone, then nothing changes. And so inviting ourselves to a new experience.
To stretch.
To, maybe if you normally are in a rhythm of doing a monthly silent retreat, but maybe you've not ever ventured away. Maybe you do stay in a hotel room by yourself for a night and give yourself that space to say, I'm not going to turn on the TV. I'm going to turn my phone off for that weekend. Like that might be a new something, a new practice for someone. So I think that that's beautiful. Or maybe if they're already in that rhythm, to say, okay, now I'm going to take the next step.
Exactly.
And I'm going to go away. But I love, the planner in me loves the scheduling it out, Allison. I love that. I do think all of us need that now more than ever in our culture. And it doesn't matter who you are.
And I'll schedule it. And I'll look forward to it most of the time. And then it gets closer and something will happen that makes me feel like I shouldn't go.
Always.
And so there is that of just like when we schedule it, we're entrusting that like God was involved in that timing. And so then as it gets closer, something could come up, but we resist that resistance. We push through that resistance and we say, no, this was the timing. This is what God had.
Right. And to understand too, that the enemy is very real. And if you are setting aside time to be alone with the Lord, he will bombard you with everything to keep you from that beautiful time. He doesn't want that. And so to understand, I will resist that. And I'll recognize, resist and recognize, like, is this an attack on this time that is going to refuel me, that's going to connect me to the Lord? And how can I press on?
Yes. And how can I invite God's help? with that, I remember I had one particular time of silence scheduled. It was a couple years ago at this time of year. And as it got closer, something was going on with one of my kids that was making me feel really spun up on the inside.
Mm.
And I thought, I cannot go be in silence right now and just spin in circles about this. Like, I was fearful around how difficult it would be internally, because I knew that I had something on my mind that I did not want to be with.
Right.
I didn't want to keep having to think about. And giving that to the Lord of like, please help me when I'm in this silence, because I'm afraid that I'm just going to keep having this one thing on my mind the whole time.
Mm.
And the way that God met me with freedom and releasing that situation and new perspective on that situation, I will never forget, because it was exactly the timing God had for me to step away from it and be with God and then step back into it.
And to process all that.
Yeah.
Man, I love this. This is exciting to me.
Yeah.
You know, to be able to, for a practice for myself, but to invite all of our friends that are listening also to experience this, whether they come to Memphis to one of our retreats, or whether they just say, hey, I can get behind this practice, or they say, this feels uncomfortable, but I'm still going to lean into it. I'm going to give it a go.
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful thing, and it will be exciting to see the fruit that comes from this.
Yes.
This
and
practice with
everybody is in a unique place in their own journey.
Yeah.
Like you described, stretch yourself in the way that works for you.
Yeah.
You know, if a day or an overnight or 3 day, you know, you don't have to start there.
Right.
We can start with 2 hours.
Yeah.
You know, and stretch and grow our capacity for it. So everybody should uniquely listen to the invitation that's for them.
Right. Right. I remember my first silent retreat. I don't even remember where it was. Oh yeah. It was out in Bartlett with Brittany and Lacey. And I brought all my stuff with me. I brought a bag full of things to do. I thought that was what it was for.
Yeah.
Like, fantastic.
Gonna get a lot done here.
Do the things.
Yeah.
But then once I kind of looked around and watched everyone not working on their to-do list, just giving myself that time, it took me a little while to slow down and lean into the practice. And then once I did, I was like, okay. And so your body does learn how to do that. And then it really does start craving it.
Yes.
And then it
does.
Yes. And it becomes something that your soul longs for that time with the Lord. So
yeah. It's very exciting.
So let's talk about journey a little bit more too. I had asked you where your journey started with the contemplative life. And you shared a really cool quote by Saint Benedict. Do you remember it?
The conversion of life.
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You had said, this phrase captures how God has been inviting me into a deeper and deeper, converting my life little by little. And that's exactly what you said for all of us. We're all at different steps in our journey, but that God is gracious and he does invite us in a little at a time.
Yeah, he really does. And, you know, having grown up in a Christian context where conversion was seen as this point, you know, which I do believe that we have a point of awareness of Christ and Christ's love for us. And we receive and begin that journey. There's this unfolding series of invitations that it's not just, okay, I was converted and now there was like the before and the after. It's like the after is full of all these little conversions, and not in a like ultimate salvation way, but in like a Christ wants every piece and every part to come back into wholeness and to receive his love. And so these invitations come to us throughout our journey for the next step of this conversion of life that we are. And that's what feels true to my experience is like, there are still parts of me that are unhealed, unrestored. Now, and little by little, God is inviting those home to his love. And so that's the idea of conversion of life. That's the idea of what's the next invitation?
Wow.
What's the next piece, God, of the journey? The next piece that you have for my healing and my wholeness and my Christ-likeness to emerge.
Right. Right. Because if we know that like the purpose of life or God's will is to have us reflect his image.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I had a friend of mine was sharing, she was asking a business mentor, or somebody was asking a business mentor, like, well, how do I know if this is God's will?
Mm.
And he says, well, are you, being changed into the image of Christ in that?
Yeah.
And if so, then that's truly God's will.
Yeah.
And so I love that little conversion of life conversion.
Yes.
That
just
we're
reorienting to Christ's work in us
in
this ongoing way.
And one of the things you had shared too, you said that that in that conversion of life, that you were learning how God is wired. And I had never thought about that before. Like you were learning how God is wired, and then he was showing you how you were wired and how that they work together. And I thought to myself, how many times do I ask, am I really thinking and learning, how are you wired, Lord?
Yeah.
Which basically to me would mean like, what is your character, Lord? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, who is God and who am I? Is an ancient question. I can't remember if it's Augustine or someone asked that question. Like, those are the two great questions. Who is God and who am I? And when those two merge in our journey, like if those are the questions that we're carrying, that's the unfolding conversion of life, of more of God revealing to us who God is. And that is something that we keep discovering.
Yeah.
That God keeps revealing more to us. That I don't have it all figured out right now. How I see and understand God today is based on this point in my journey. But the journey image means that there's more. There's more that God's going to show me about how God is wired. There's more for how God has wired me that God is going to keep revealing. And so it's this adventure, and the invitations are calling us towards that. These invitations that invite us to, oh, I didn't realize God was playful. Like I didn't realize that God delighted in me or in things, you know. And I'm seeing that in a new way. Or I didn't realize that I could start something new. I did not know that about me.
Yeah.
And that has come into my journey in an unexpected way. And so it's like this discovery as we go along.
Yeah.
And who God is and who God has made me to be come together and work together and cooperate so that Christ can be born inside of the particulars of my life in a unique way. And it'll be different for you. It'll be where you are in your journey. What special quality about God is God showing you? And what special quality about you is God showing you? And so you're listening and noticing for those things that are going to come to you in a unique way. And I'm listening for how those will come to me. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think that you guys do a beautiful job at the retreat house with helping us learn how God is wired by some of the different words that like every month you guys will put out a word or a intention. And that's helped me to like some of the words you guys have used, like delight and presence. Those have helped me focus on him. But then I think you guys also do a beautiful job in helping us learn how we are wired through spiritual direction, through Enneagram coaching, through personal coaching, marriage coaching. It really does help us do that. I don't think I had ever done any inner work up until like probably the last 7 or 8 years. And starting to learn them, like, wow, I think I had always known like personality tests, you know, different like Strengths Finder and that. But I really do think that y'all do a beautiful job of helping us learn both of those. Learning how God is wired, and then learning how we're wired, and then how they work together.
Yes. Yeah. How they work together, how they interact. And what it brings about is a richness to life with God, where it moves from knowledge of God and just learning about God, like God is some faraway being that we're just supposed to like have good information about, to like God is a being that wants to interact and cooperate with us in our lives. So who God is and who we are is much more experiential knowing.
Yeah.
And these practices help us to unearth some of that. So,
and the experiences that y'all invite us to really does help that. So like being able to sit with him and experience time with him, putting everything else aside.
Yes, that's what can come into silence is those things.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about our inner work and, looking at ourselves, looking at the Lord, kind of getting away and being silent. But I know a lot of the ways Jesus modeled, every way Jesus modeled, is getting alone, being with the Father, being filled up, but then going back out.
Yeah.
And so that's not only what you guys offer at the retreat house, but that's really in your story. You shared a little bit about that you're from Memphis, but you also lived in Baltimore for a while, and that God kind of puts you in like you said, a gritty neighborhood. But I know one of your passions is really to also be a good neighbor to others. And so I think we talk a lot about inner work, and I don't want anyone to think that we're only focusing on ourselves and growing ourselves. It's just a part of learning how to restore, be filled back up so that we can go back out and we can know how to love others well.
Yes.
Talk a little bit, share with us, how maybe in this new year too, we can invite others in at this same time and love others well too.
Yeah. I love that you're bringing those two realms together of our life, our contemplative alone life and our interacting relational life.
Right.
And those are so connected. And what I have found truly, truly, truly happens is when we create these kind of containers for God's love to fill that kind of space, that love insists on moving out towards others.
Right.
It really does become this active love that then moves into the world and moves into our neighborhoods and our contexts. So I do really believe that both are necessary for the spiritual life.
Yeah.
And both have value for our Christ-likeness, our intimacy with God to deepen. Yeah. And so I would encourage anyone as they're looking at their year, look for, okay, what are the rhythms? What are the ways that I'm nourishing that inner life? And then how does that want to flow out into my context?
Yeah.
And it can be simple. It can be a big surrender. It can be a small surrender. It can, there's lots of different ways that it's going to look in different seasons of our life. But just to say yes to the next invitation when it comes. Yeah. And so that could be to care for a neighbor, somebody you see who needs a friend, or, you're out on your neighborhood walk and they're at their mailbox and they seem like they want to chat. And you're like, I don't really have time, but like, they seem like they need someone to listen for a moment. I mean, I have found that almost everywhere I go, my husband's like, it's like you have a sign on your head that people are like, oh, I should share my life with her. Like if I'm in the grocery, if I'm in, people just start. And so I've tried to create a little space for that in my schedule so that when someone needs that, I can be that. Whether it's in an official spiritual direction context or whether it's on a walk and I'm passing my neighbor at the mailbox. And so we can look at our rhythms and we can say, which are the input, which are the output. Some of us overdo output. We overdo, okay, well, I need to serve, give, do, be involved, show up in all these ways. But is my inner life just sort of dying on the vine? Is that from a place of being filled up by God's love? And so you may just want to jot down, like look over the past month or the past week and write input and output. Like, what are the things that I'm doing? What are the rhythms that are nourishing, that are input rhythms that fill up my soul and give me energy and life with God? And what are the output rhythms? What are the things that are for the good of others, that are in service, that are in love, that are something's flowing out of me? Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm laughing because that has been such a skill, if I can call it a skill for me to
Yeah.
learn, or a new
Yes.
habit. Man, I mean, again, I am such a classic overscheduler. And I remember a friend asking me, she said, Sharice, what if the Lord wanted to use or wanted to move in your day? You have so overscheduled. There is no way that he can move. Like, what if he brought a friend up, you saw a friend and you're out to lunch with a client or something and they really needed you, but because you've overscheduled yourself, there's no time for that. And so, learning, but I think I had never made space for, I'd never even thought about that. I was so busy trying to control that that's a thing where I'm like learning to flip my hands over and say, okay, Lord, let me give you that control. Let me not over plan, over schedule, so that if somebody needs to talk, that I'm not like, I don't have time for that.
Yeah. And that's such a good example of an output rhythm that doesn't even seem like a thing, because it's like you're not scheduling time to go serve at such and such.
Right.
You're saying, I'm just not going to fill all the pockets.
Yeah.
And I'm going to trust that into those pockets, God might bring an opportunity for me to love.
Always.
And certainly in our homes. I mean, that's the first place where it's like, if I have overscheduled, then I don't have the margin to stop and listen when one of my kids needs to talk. And that's a huge output rhythm, is our families.
Yeah.
So be gracious with ourselves too. Like when we write those input and output, the natural organic things, like it doesn't have to be an official area of service. If we're offering love to the people in our home, that's output.
I love that, Allison. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm over here. I'm trying to keep us on task, but I'm over here processing like, yeah, that's really good. Thankfully, I get to listen when everyone else is listening, and I'll bring it in. All right. I know we have the last few minutes. I love, there's so much that you said when I had asked Allison really over this last decade what the Lord had been doing. You had a beautiful explanation. You said that you feel like this last decade has been a decade of expansion. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has been. And again, that expansion happens from stretching.
Right.
From our growing edge, from that like opening up our capacity.
Yeah. Sitting with things that maybe aren't always comfortable, but God growing your capacity.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh man, there's so much too. Okay. Oh man. It's okay. I've already had Allison. This is the second time she's gonna be back again too. And you said this earlier about rigidity. And I can tend to be very rigid. And so I love the freedom that you gave us in that God is not asking us to be rigid. He's just inviting us in to be with him.
Yes. And I think that's so important at the beginning of a new year.
Yeah.
That we don't give ourselves like these rigid expectations of self-improvement, but that we're just like making space in a way that actually works and in a way that actually makes sense for our lives, and that our rhythms can be simple. They don't have to be difficult or bossing us around.
Right. I love to always ask everyone too, their 10-year-old self question. And I think that this has become my question because I don't know if you asked it, but specifically in our spiritual direction session, when I go back to it, I always go back to the 10-year-old me in the tree.
Yes.
And so that's, I think, why I love to ask you guys that. So what would you tell your 10-year-old self?
Yeah.
Looking back.
I mean, I think, first of all, to say that we get a lot of information when we look back at our 10-year-old selves.
Yeah.
That when we imagine, when we go back to what we loved, who we were, we find a lot of goodness there that sometimes we, get the chance to recover now. I think when I was 10, I felt this like pressure around double digits. Like if you turn double digits, like you don't need to play imaginary games anymore. Like I felt like this, I needed to move forward in my letting go of childish whatever.
Right.
So what I would tell my 10-year-old self is don't lose your imagination. You don't have to let go of your creativity. You don't have to let go of playing outside. You don't have to let go of imagination. Mm. And those things have actually come back around for me to be portals to God.
Yeah.
So I would have told myself then, don't get rid of them. Don't think you're,
Right.
age out of those, you don't.
Right. Right. Hang on to those.
Yeah.
Those are beautiful. Any final closing thoughts that I know your biggest closing thought was the invitation.
Yeah.
For all of us. And I loved it so much, but.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of freedom in our journeys being unique. And I think my final thought would be to embrace your unique journey. Like for me, for you, for the listener, that yours doesn't have to look like anybody else's, and it won't. That God's invitations are so personal and they are so tailored for each of us that what comes to you as the next invitation, the next step is different, and to let yourself be right where you are and just be curious and open to what that invitation is. And when it comes, sometimes God's invitations are exciting and sometimes they're terrible. They feel like pain. They can feel hard. Mm-hmm. They can feel difficult. And so we have to be patient with ourselves with those. And God is very gentle and very patient with us. That God's invitations are the most compassionate ones. Mm-hmm. And God's going to give us what we need for the next step. There's a quote that I love that says, there will be manna and there will be people to eat it with. And so whatever the next invitation is for you, for the listener, God will give you what you need to say yes and to step into it and embrace that your next step and your next invitation is going to be unique for you.
Thank you. Yeah. Man, so beautiful.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
I like being here.
All right, y'all. We have lots to think on and lots to process. See you next week.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me on this journey of restoration and renewal. Remember, you can stay connected with me between episodes by following me on Instagram. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to ensure you never miss an episode. And if you found value in our conversation today, I'd truly appreciate it if you leave a review on your favorite podcast platform or share the show with a friend who might benefit from these rhythms. Until next time, may you find peace in knowing that you can show up every day simply as you are. And that is enough. Take care.